NAPLAN. It's almost that time again. However, the NAPLAN testing experience and the pamphlets sent home to families can be challenging to interpret. Accompanied by sensationalized media headlines and mixed messages, it can be difficult to understand what NAPLAN is really telling us. This short video is to help you understand a few important basics about NAPLAN. What does NAPLAN tell us, and what doesn't NAPLAN tell us? How can NAPLAN help your child's education, and how can NAPLAN harm your child's education? Let's jump into it. What is NAPLAN? The National Assessment Program, Literacy and Numeracy, or NAPLAN for short, is a series of annually held mandatory standardized tests that millions of Australian students have participated in since 2009. A standardized test assesses individuals' ability, knowledge, or skills by completing the same test, administered and scored in a systematic, standard way. This means no matter who you are, where you're from, or your schooling experience, whether a white-collar family or a blue-collar family, country to coast, every child is tested in the same way. It does not take into consideration anything that makes your child unique and treats every Australian child as the exact same. This is seen as a fair and objective way of determining things about your child and their education, as well as comparing different student populations. The Australian government's push for this standardized testing was driven by the desire to meet public accountability and demonstrate transparency and maintain public confidence in the standards of schooling. So each year, every year 3, 5, 7, and 9 student in schools across the nation participate in literacy and numeracy tests that are completely unknown, unable to be studied for, and generally separate from your child's broader education. While typically held in May, 2023 will be the first year NAPLAN is held in Term 1, so in other words, very soon. What does NAPLAN tell us? As intended, NAPLAN can provide the government and schools with a broad overview of educational systems and their initiatives. This data can act as conversation starters that should be investigated more deeply. Insights from this single snapshot in time can also support broad comparisons of large population groups. For example, how are regional students learning compared to metropolitan students, or comparing state to state? However, despite what the media tells us, these state-to-state comparisons are typically very close and practically inconsequential. What doesn't NAPLAN tell us? NAPLAN is expected to sample common knowledge across a large cohort of students at the exact same time. For example, the NAPLAN numeracy test contains less than 40 questions to sample hundreds of Australian curriculum mathematics concepts and skills via multiple choice or short response questions. Furthermore, the selection of questions is designed to capture all the years of schooling up to that point. So Year 7 is a collection of Year 6, 5, 4, and so on. Therefore, it's not uncommon to see the same NAPLAN question on different year-level NAPLAN tests. This is also why it's important for students to have a deep conceptual understanding instead of surface-level short-term memorization. But that's a conversation for another day. With such a test design, there is an expected margin of error that you should be aware of and that your NAPLAN result pamphlet will not show. Even though it's reported NAPLAN's data can identify areas of strength and need for individual students and confidently compare your child to the national average, the experts, like world-leading statistics and educational management expert Margaret Wu, caution how this isn't exactly true. Without getting too deep into the details, in statistics and educational measurement there is something called a measurement error. This takes into consideration factors like the type of test, the number of questions, the probability of similar results, and the confidence in the results accurately representing the child. However, each year, parents like yourself receive NAPLAN result pamphlets and they do not have these measurement errors indicated. Often, a little dot indicating where your child supposedly sits in comparison to various bands, the national average, or their school. But the truth is, your child's true ability could sit within multiple bands and potentially be above or below this national average. This can easily mislead people into thinking these results are a lot more precise than they are, or create unnecessary concern about your child's learning. This could also raise unfair judgment about your child's school. In February 2023, there was an announcement stating changes to the NAPLAN results parents will receive, which sounds like a lot more information will be available. However, it will be interesting to see if these changes finally address important considerations like measurement errors and if they are honest with parents about the accuracy of their child's individual results. Furthermore, NAPLAN's depiction of literacy and numeracy is only a very narrow picture of what literacy and numeracy are really about, as well as what your child's overall ability could be. What about the arts, sciences, mental and physical health, creativity, problem solving, critical thinking, citizenship, collaboration, and metacognition. All very important things your child will need in the ever-changing 21st century. NAPLAN can't tell us that. How NAPLAN can help your child's education. As originally intended, NAPLAN can highlight broad educational patterns or trends across the nation that can or should be investigated further. Documentation also suggests that NAPLAN data can help direct funding or resource allocation, as well as indicate the types of support schools may need. In saying this, author and Professor Alan Reed calls out how NAPLAN data is being used to justify increasing private school funding, despite state schools supporting roughly 80% of Australia's most educationally vulnerable students. A high population of public money is being spent on private schooling, higher than in any other advanced economy. When NAPLAN data is used wisely, your child's school might like to investigate patterns and question broad themes within this single sample of information, such as student thinking patterns and possible common misconceptions. However, this should be done in a way that doesn't misapply the data or purpose of NAPLAN, as well as remembering what NAPLAN does and doesn't tell us. How NAPLAN can harm your child's education. One of the most harmful ways NAPLAN can impact your child's education is when NAPLAN's data is oversimplified and misused. This can be seen in media sensationalism, with clickbait headlines or league tables that exclusively focus on comparing schools with misappropriated data. That's like ranking cafes across Australia based on one single Google review on one single coffee each. This communicates very little to the community. It can stigmatize schools and students, create stereotypes, and negatively pressure schools to veer away from good educational practices out of fear of being named and shamed, or judged based on where they sit on this school shopping list. What about the other factors we should care about in our Australian schools, such as individual students receiving the support they need, schools being a safe, supportive, and inclusive place, students' happiness and positive classroom culture, sporting and music programs, philanthropy and community connections, real-world readiness, social-emotional support for students and families, the professionalism of teachers who are engaged in innovative practices that benefit your child versus teaching your child to be a test taker. Politicians can use oversimplified league tables and NAPLAN sensationalism to pull on your heartstrings, blame the other party or make promises about what they can do better, all while criticizing educators who work with your children every day, ignoring the voices of those who may be able to offer explanations as to why, and missing true opportunities to better support the education system. Due to high-stakes pressure, schools can make knee-jerk reactions based on misused NAPLAN data, which then has flow-on effects and consequences to the stability of your child's learning. When schools are too heavily reliant off one piece of data, teachers can over-prioritize NAPLAN and disregard other more important classroom learning and assessment, including getting to know your child and their individual learning needs. This is often referred to as teaching to the test. Even though the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority, ACARA, states the best preparation for NAPLAN is an instruction in the literacy and numeracy content in the Australian curriculum. We do not encourage excessive drilling or cramming. Though these consequences aren't too surprising or unexpected, in 2009, the first year of NAPLAN, the Australian Primary Principals Association, which at this time represented 7,200 government, Catholic and independent principals across Australia, raised concerns about NAPLAN. This included narrowing the curriculum, creating neglected areas of learning, coaching students as test takers, and the time spent teaching to the test. In fact, even before Australia implemented NAPLAN, other countries like the US and the UK implemented similar standardized testing regimes and experienced widespread negative unintended consequences such as these. However, being mandatory, Australian schools didn't really have much of a choice. Furthermore, there is not a lot of unbiased and fact-checked educational research that supports NAPLAN. However, there is a lot about the harm of NAPLAN. This includes how Australia's international ranking in mathematics, science and reading has shown a steady decline over the past 20 years, which has been partly attributed to standardized regimes like NAPLAN. Educating Australia's youth is a complex matter, and therefore some of this video has been simplified for the purpose of this information. But if you'd like to find out more, I've linked my published journal article that inspired this video in the comments below. So what does all of this mean? Overall, it's important to remember NAPLAN's intended purpose, what it can tell us and what it can't, how it can help and when misused, how it can harm. Be aware come NAPLAN time. Help your child manage their own expectations and emotions, especially if they've inherited some of the pressure and hype around NAPLAN. Be conscious of sensationalism in your child's school and the wider public sphere. NAPLAN does not and should not measure a school's worth. Learning is a beautiful thing, and your child and their education are more than a single test score.